Let's watch a cartoon where evil aliens are rehabilitated to become functioning members of society.
It's like Juvie for space creatures.
I'm Alec, this is my brother Lucas, and welcome to Alien Months at Hester Bros Cartoon Theater. Today, we're watching Lilo and Stitch the series and asking the question, is it for kids?
And is it for adults?
I know that you're probably thinking to yourself, Lilo and Stitch the series, okay, so that's a kids show. We would agree with you. We're not going to debate that part of it, and usually, we'll hold out on the verdict. We know that this show's for kids. But I do think that there's a very interesting discussion to be had about whether this is also a good show for adults. If you haven't seen this series before, it's a spin-off of the Lilo and Stitch movie series. Everyone pretty much knows who Stitch is. The alien experiment designed by Jumbo Jukiba. Stitch is experiment 626, but there are 625 experiments that came before him. All are contained within these little pods that will activate when water touches them. The original Stitch movie, we really only get Stitch. This series just follows Lilo and Stitch in the Hawaiian Islands, discovering these different experiments and kind of turning them from evil aliens into members of society that have their own special place that they belong.
So, growing up, this kind of functionally worked almost like a Pokemon for me. Alec and I made a whole set of trading cards and laminated them that had all of the different aliens with stats on them and tried to make a fighting game out of it. It was a really cool idea, and the concept of having all of these different aliens is very serializable, if that's a word. And for that reason, I loved it. There's so many aliens in this show that we get to see that are really awesome designs. We could not hope to cover them all, so they may just show up in random parts throughout this episode. Speaking of which, there's one right now. It's Mr. Stenchy, and he really thinks you should subscribe to our channel. Look at those eyes. Look at him.
My experience with this series, as you said, very fun, something that we were able to bond over. I also have watched a few of these episodes as an adult, usually for holidays. Over Halloween, watched a Halloween special, Valentine's Day, Christmas, watched the specials for those, and every time I was very, very impressed with how good they were. And I was excited to watch an episode today that was a non-holiday special. The one that we went with was called Dupe, where Lilo and Stitch find an alien experiment that can duplicate things. Lilo tries to have a slumber party with friends. Nobody shows up. She tries duplicating herself to have some friends, which is pretty sad. Stitch accidentally gets cloned instead, resulting in calamity. I want to know what your first impressions were on this episode that we watched.
There's a few things that I really, really love about this show, and a few things that I didn't care for as much. I don't think it's any secret that I don't really care for episodic content very much, and one of the things that you mentioned is Lilo has she has a slumber party, and she tries to invite this awful person who's always super mean to her and all of her friends.
Hope you haven't forgotten about my slumber party. Oh yeah, your slumber party. But we're not going to her slumber party. I never said we were going. I just said we didn't forget.
The thing that I don't like about episodic content is there's no real growth. There are always these canned lessons at the end of an episode. If you actually integrated every single lesson that you get in an episodic show, that character would be completely different from the beginning of season 1 to the end of season 1. Because you would have totally have actually grown a lot, as opposed to just falling into the same silly habits that we need to have to teach children lessons. This one isn't above doing that. The fact that Lilo is constantly trying to be friends with these people who are just awful, that sucks.
You would think she'd learn by now.
But then there's characters like Bleakley and the sandwich guy, 625, and they're hilarious and so likable.
Even though I'm the adult guardian, I'm as excited as a little girl.
The villain, Gantu, is one of my favorite characters and is almost more relatable to me than anyone else in the show. I find myself saying that on our show about villains a little bit too often, and I'm starting to get nervous. In today's episode, we get this part where Gantu, like, messes up trying to catch the experiment. And he ends up sitting down with 625 and having a Freudian psychology session.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it.
Hey, you've obviously had a bad day. This is about you. Why don't you tell me a little about your childhood?
My father was very authoritarian, so I didn't have many friends.
I totally feel for him. He's such a sympathetic villain, and you don't get sympathetic villains a lot. And even though it's played for comedy, it makes you really like him as a character. And I almost found myself rooting for him to succeed because Lilo is kind of petty. Oh, you guys aren't my friends? Well, I'm just gonna create my posse.
They see me rolling.
I actually have always felt that Lilo is the most underrated character in the Stitch series because she's often overlooked for Stitch. In this example that you just brought up, I think that this episode, but not just the episode, the entire series has a really awesome juxtaposition between Gantu and Lilo, where they deal with their own securities in different ways. And in this episode, we sort of get Lilo dealing with her loneliness and Gantu dealing with his failure. And both of them, in completely different ways, get those insecurities addressed and then get this semblance of power. They are changed probably for the worse because they have this power. And yet, because they're different characters, they deal with it in a different way that you would not expect the other to handle it. You said that Lilo gets petty because she starts to feel like, yeah, you know, screw these girls. They can't have what I have. Gantu is just like, raw power. I can ignore my best friend 625, who was just nice and gave therapy to me because I have these new powerful monsters that can conquer the world with me. Ha ha ha. I think that the way that Gantu and Lilo play off of each other through the series is one of my favorite parts about it.
You know, that's a really good point. I did not think about it like that. They're totally compensating, both in their own ways, in a very parallel way. I really never thought about it like that. That's a good takeaway. I will say one of the things that I disliked about the show was Lilo. I'll be honest.
Okay, see, we're gonna be on a different page here.
I just don't relate to her at all in any way. This is gonna come across poorly, but I didn't really have that issue where I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. And I don't relate to the backwards petty stuff that she started to do. I don't really care for Stitch that much either, to be honest. And that's probably not a popular opinion, but they both kind of lean into the annoying behavior and trope a little bit too hard. But the thing that I love about the show is literally everyone else. I love Nani. I love the older sister. I even like the dynamic between Lilo and Nani. I don't like Lilo as an individual character, but I still like how she plays off of other people. And the voice acting is phenomenal. I can't speak for the voice acting of Stitch because Lilo's got a fine voice actor as well. Definitely stands out. Doesn't feel phony really most of the time, I think.
I'm sorry I split you up and made you all weak just so I could have friends.
Pleakley and the Sandwich Guy and Gantu and Jamba Dude, they all sell it for me. Those are my favorite characters. All of those side characters are just stellar in so many ways. I love how Pleakley was the secret gay character that a lot of us probably gravitated to growing up.
Pleakley has so many fans. It is the kind of character that is proud of this and you find identity with. I'm going to make a case for Lilo here, because you always talk about protagonist syndrome and how there's some characters that are basically a blank slate for others to play off of. Lilo to me is not that. Lilo is very much a weird character, and that's why she gravitates to Stitch. That's monstrosity of a character, and it's the relationship between them that drives the movie and the show. Lilo is not what you expect from a character of that type. You usually expect them to be a little bit more bland, or have motivations that are easier to tell a lesson with, or maybe a little bit more pure. And in this case, her motivation really isn't that pure. She really is being petty, but I do think that that's relatable. You couldn't relate to not having friends. I can definitely relate to not having friends growing up. And I definitely see myself in a character like Lilo, trying to, relate to people despite her weird quirks that she might have here and there.
But I think you would have handled it totally differently, because you were nice.
Sure.
You would never have stooped to pettiness.
But Lilo is a kid, and I think, again, in this episode, she gets this piece of power that she's not expecting, and I don't think that she would expect herself to react that way, but she sort of did, and I never really had that feeling, so who knows how I would have reacted, Kids are immature, and they oftentimes behave in ways that they wouldn't be proud of in the future. I certainly have plenty of those moments. But I will say this, I think it's really cool that you and I like different things about this series. One thing that I believe that both of us like equally is playing more into this formulaic concept that in this show works because of all of the different alien experiments. And every new episode, we get a new character design. In this specific episode, we had a whole bunch of character designs, which is part of the reason that I picked it. I do think that that was the reason that we made our trading card game growing up, the reason that we became so obsessed with this series to begin with.
That is the major draw of this show, is just the serialized alien characters. I remember loving this episode growing up because the thing I looked forward to the most in every episode was just seeing the different characters and their powers. So when we got the 4 that Gantu finds in addition to the copycat one, and we see all the ones that Stitch invites over for his sleepover, that was just a field day for me. I loved seeing all of them. You could play with them in your head. What would these two do if they were in a fight or in a scenario together? How would these characters play off of each other? What could they do for society even? Is an awesome question that I think that it starts, plugging for kids too. And that aspect, I agree with you. It works as a strong episodic show for that reason. But the part where it falls off for me is still just the episodic morality that just gets lost at the end of every episode. I probably wouldn't want to watch the whole show over again, but I still like the idea of the different aliens, and that aspect is cool to me. And when I compare it to other Disney shows that I've seen, I think it's probably one of the better ones, if not the best one that I've seen. Shows that have been spin-offs. Gravity Falls takes the cake, obviously.
Gosh, okay. There is so much that I want to unpack from what you just said. First, I want to go over the fact that you said you would probably not watch every episode of this show. I had a different takeaway. It made me feel like I actually would go back and watch this series, which even for me is rare for a formulaic show. It's just because I liked it. I just thought it was really funny. There's lots of good moments. The alien designs are still fun. It's fun to see them come into play in different ways. You mentioned that at the end, they always find that one true home for the alien, and I thought it was so amazingly hilarious how they did it for this episode, where we get a gag early in the episode.
Business hasn't been as good since everyone started counting calories.
Dupe, who's the star of this episode, can duplicate people and then they lower in power. So if he duplicates ice cream...
There's something different. Is this locale?
So his true home ends up helping this ice cream guy with his business cut the calories by cloning the ice cream. It's actually like a really clever way of writing, and every episode adds a different piece of intrigue because there's so many creative ways that you can have these aliens find that purpose. And to be honest, I don't think that I ever get tired of that. You also mentioned that the ending is tired and it's a moral that gets lost. Well, I want to hold on a second because we're going to do a segment here, Sociology with Alec. This ending was actually very interesting to me because the overall moral that we learn is when it comes to friends, it's quality, not quantity that counts. That's the message that Lilo comes away with. This is true. Positive psychology research has indicated that social connections are maybe the strongest contributor to happiness levels in people, but it is the strength of those connections that counts rather than the amount of connections.
So the second big lesson that we learned is that it's not just the number of friends you have, and it's not whether or not you're in a committed relationship, but it's the quality of your close relationships that matters.
The longest running happiness study is actually a Harvard experiment that watched a bunch of people grow throughout their lives from basically until they were in college until they died of old age. They measured high-level college graduates and then people who didn't go to college at all. And the happiness levels didn't really differ between them at all. The only big correlation that was found was that the people with the strongest social connections were the happiest, regardless of how good their education was and regardless of how much money they made. Happiness science is a very complicated thing. I've spoken about it in podcasts and interviews before. As much as this was just kind of maybe a throwaway moral message, they actually did get it right, and that is that quality is what counts more than quantity when it comes to friendship.
But for some reason, Lilo still tries to be friends with this terrible person.
All right, well, we won't think too hard about that.
Don't get me wrong, I would watch more episodes of the show. I wouldn't watch it all. The Halloween special, I love. I don't remember the Christmas one at all. I don't remember liking it that much. But there are episodes that I would go back and rewatch.
I'm telling you guys, Valentine's Day is worth watching.
See, I don't even identify that as a real holiday. That's the one with the hummingbird, right? The cute little hummingbird that makes people fall in love.
It is that one. It's so good.
There he is right now. Oh, isn't that cute? He says subscribe to our channel. Isn't that weird? Oh my gosh. I just hit subscribe. with my 3 fake accounts.
You mentioned Disney spin-off shows. In my opinion, Disney spin-off shows are insanely underrated. Disney fans are everywhere, and so many of them will watch Disney movies, Pixar movies, go to the parks, consume all of this Disney content, but many of them have a blind spot when it comes to the Disney television world, especially with the spin-offs of the movies. Part of the reason for this is that the direct-to-DVD movies would be very underwhelming. Maybe because they were made more like a TV show than a movie, so it didn't feel like they belonged in that format. But there's lots of really good Disney spin-offs. Like, this is one, but we've also got a spin-off of Tangled, Hercules, Emperor's New Groove, Aladdin, and every single one of those is a very enjoyable watch for me, even as an adult.
I might contest that. We'll do an editorial one day.
What do you think? Do you think that people are sleeping on this one? Because when we did our most underrated cartoon special, Lilo and Stitch was on my list, and I will say that after this watch, it is still solidly on my list, no doubt about it.
What you said about the Disney niche, I agree with. If you're a Disney fan, there's probably no reason why you wouldn't like this show. I'm not really like that. I have no loyalty to companies, especially ones that make more money than the rest of the human population could make in their entire lives. The show outside of a Disney product, and outside of that context, it really depends. There are some shows, some cartoons that are just too kid-friendly and really no adult would get almost any enjoyment out of it except for like nostalgia, or if you're a fan of like a specific voice actor or writer or something like that. And for this one, I don't think it's quite on that level that I would say no adults would like it. If you tend to enjoy shows like SpongeBob, I think Lilo and Stitch would be for you. I think if you tend to not like the more silly, kid-friendly cartoons, I think it's probably not for you.
Across the board, like, many adults probably enjoy most Disney movies because they're usually pretty good. When it comes to a TV series, there's a difference in the sense that, at least over the last 20 however many years, it's been on a network TV where the real goal is to provide marketing revenue and show commercials to children. But there's a lot of love that creators of these cartoons will put into the show, many of them which are adults. This is one of those shows where just because it happened to end up marketed for kids does not mean that they were not having a blast making it and that there are not some genuinely really funny and enjoyable moments across the way. If you are just an adult who happens to like Lilo and Stitch, there's no reason at all why you wouldn't like the series too. I would go as far as to say the franchise works better as a series than it does a movie. I think that this is the perfect format for it. I can understand the criticism of the characters not learning, but we have to acknowledge that that is just a formulaic show most of the time.
I don't think that's true. I think there are formulaic shows that do have overarching character growth. One show that I'm going to plug right now that we're going to talk about soon is Rick and Morty. That show actually has character growth over multiple seasons, even though it tends to like the episodic formula.
Sure, and I do think that as a medium, animation is headed more toward that realm. I actually think it works pretty well as a formulaic show. I could go for some growth too. There is an anime called Stitch that came after this and is in canon, and another spin-off series that was made in China, also in canon. Both series take place in the future. That might be really fun for us to visit in the future when we cover some anime.
I gotta see that.
You know, Lucas, you mentioned it. Rick and Morty is the cartoon we are going to be covering next week, so please stay tuned for that. We would love if you guys like, subscribe, follow everything that we have going on in the cartoon theater. Let us know what shows you want to hear about, because if you're a cartoon lover like us, we want you to be involved with this.
Charity shout out?
Yes! Okay, thank you. I would love for you to share what this idea is.
Totally. So, there's this YouTuber that I've been watching since I was very young, the Nostalgia Critic. I'm sure a lot of you know who they are. They're part of Channel Awesome. They're a movie reviewer, and where I've drawn a lot of inspiration to create our show. They've been doing a charity shout out at the end of every episode, just as a way of using their small platform to hopefully try to give a platform to people who are interested in giving back to some sort of community. My causes are usually environmentalism, and, you know, I mean, obviously we'll be sharing a bunch of different charities, a different one every episode. At the end of these, we're just going to be giving you guys the information for a specific charity that you could give some money to and help out, maybe a cause that you believe in, and something that, you know, we could all use to kind of spread the wealth a little bit.
This week, we're going to be shouting out a charity called the Ukulele Kids Club Incorporated. They are a nonprofit that tries to transform lives through music by bringing music therapy through ukuleles and other instruments to kids that are going through medical obstacles. My friend Emmy, who actually originally recommended the Lilo and Stitch episode to us was just on a live stream yesterday performing ukulele for this charity, and I thought that it would be fun to shout out this charity that she was speaking on behalf of for our first episode here, especially since we covered Lilo and Stitch. We're going to throw the link to that in the show notes. I am going to make a commitment that every charity that we shout out on this show, between Lucas and I, we are going to donate some money to that. So please, we would love for you guys to get involved too. And again, let us know if you have a charity that you would like to get shouted out on the show, because we would love to support it.
Yes, we would love charity recommendations. And to anybody listening to this, even a small amount goes a really long way. If everyone donates $1, that is extremely helpful. Definitely think about it. And thanks so much. Stay tuned for next time. Take care.
We'll see you guys next time.
It's like Juvie for space creatures.
Okay.
Except that doesn't happen in Juvie. It's not like Juvie for space creatures.